Come with me as we delve into the depths and the darkness of English medieval social history. This week, Trial by Ordeal. Right guys, welcome to the late edition of Social History Sunday. Honestly, technical difficulties have precluded me from uploading this video any sooner than now. I swear some cosmic being did not want me to make this video. But here we go again. Right, so what we're talking about? We're talking about what I think is actually a really interesting subject once you get into it, with all sorts of twists and turns and potential oddities. And we're talking about trial by ordeal. So what was it? Right, okay, if we go back and we'll look specifically at the 9th, 10th through to the 12th century. This is a time when trial by ordeal was most popular. And basically what it was, if you were accused of a crime, you could choose to undergo trial by ordeal. I mean, you've heard of trial by combat and trial by peers and things like that. This was trial by ordeal, where you would voluntarily submit yourself to some kind of physical ordeal, the outcome of which would prove your innocence or otherwise. Right, so why did they do it? Well, loads of different reasons. Most probably, I think, even though there's nothing really says, there's hints and intimations throughout this entire subject, and the reasons are hinted at as well. I think a lot of it comes down to a mistrust of the legal system in the 9th, 10th, 12th centuries as a result of, well, the Normans basically, the Vikings and the Normans. And it was a way of ensuring, because even, for instance, in the 11th century, even the Normans would accept the results of a trial by ordeal, because as far as everybody was concerned, throughout the entire country and the legal system and everything, trial by ordeal was governed by God. Nobody else. It was all down to God's will and intent. If you were innocent, God would prove you innocent. If you were guilty, God would prove you guilty. It's as simple as that. And it comes down to a trust issue. Now what you've got to realise is that the ordinary everyday folks, well, everybody really, in the medieval era, specifically, well, we'll leave it at that, were incredibly, intently, wholeheartedly God-fearing. They wholeheartedly believed that everything that happened with the will and intent of God. It was God's will, no matter what. So that's the situation. That's the society they were living in. It was deeply religious. Okay, so what was trial by ordeal? Well, there were three main types. Obviously there were regional variations, but there were three main types. You had trial by hot iron, in which situation the accused had to grasp a hot iron bar that had just come out of a brazier of coals and grasp it and carry it for a set distance, usually about 5 paces, without dropping it. And then they had to heal up within a certain time. Trial by hot water was a similar sort of thing. They had to plunge their arm, usually up to the elbow, in a pot or kettle or cauldron of boiling water and retrieve a stone from the bottom of the pot. And then they had to heal up within a certain amount of time. And then there was trial by cold water. Now trial by cold water was a little bit different and it was a little bit specialist. But basically you would be tied up, bound, and then you would be thrown into a body of water, a river, a well, a pond, and if you sank, you were innocent. If you floated, you were guilty. A little bit more to it to that, but that's basically it. And a bit sort of topsy-turvy, really, as far as everybody's concerned. I mean, after all, if you sink, it's like, innocent, float, you're guilty. Anyway, so that was basically it. However, it's not as simple or cut and dried as you might suppose. If you look into it a little bit more deeply. Now, I will admit a lot of what I'm going to say is supposition, and it's inference rather than evidence, and basically reading between the lines of history. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence, as in stories passed down, but no written, direct, documentary evidence for some of the things I'm about to say. We do know that trial by ordeal went on, but it's the way it was conducted that is shrouded in mystery. Right, so we'll start with, I'll tell you what, we'll start with a description of trial by cold water. So as I said, you were tied up and you were thrown into a body of water, and if you floated you were guilty, if you sank you were innocent. Now lots of people have got it into their heads, and I can understand why, that the person who sank would then drown. Not quite. There's a few things from the process that seem to have been forgotten about. The first thing is that the bound person, when thrown into the water, wasn't just thrown in tied up. They were actually tethered. They were attached to a length of rope which could be used to pull them back out. After all, nobody wants to kill an innocent person, because that in itself is a crime. It might not be a criminal charge brought against you, but it's a moral charge. It can affect your mortal soul. To allow an innocent person to die is a mortal sin. So it didn't happen. As soon as you sank, they pulled you out. That's the first thing. The second thing is a trial by cold water was always in a specific depth of water, and it had to be a minimum of 12 foot deep. Now we know this for a fact. We don't know, there's no direct evidence as to why it's supposed to be 12 foot deep, but I have a feeling it's to do with the height of the cross upon which Jesus Christ was crucified. I can't prove it as yet, but I'm looking into it. So it's 12 foot deep, and there were markings on the ropes to indicate how far you'd sank. So if you think about it, you'd be tied, you would be bound up, and be thrown in. Now, this is where it gets a little bit sort of dodgy, shall we say, because a bound body, a bound person who is unable to move, if thrown into a body of water, will naturally sink. The clergymen conducting these tests, I think, knew this. Now, why is this important? Because, and here's the thing, and this applies right throughout trial by ordeal, it wasn't in the church's interest to prove anybody guilty. If somebody failed a trial by ordeal, it wasn't in the church's interest for that to happen. It was better for the church if they were found not guilty, if they passed the trial by ordeal. Now, why do I say that? Okay, well, the church, especially in the Middle Ages, medieval era, was entirely dependent upon its livelihood and its continued existence, entirely dependent upon the patronage, the support of the people. If the people started to lose faith in the establishment, in the system, it wouldn't be long before the church was on its back foot, similar to what it is in the modern day today. People don't believe as much, so the church is on the back foot. So it was in their interest to allow people, to make people pass the trial by ordeal. So, and they knew things, and they did things in a certain way. So for instance, if you were being thrown into a body of water, they would bind your hands quite tightly behind your knees, with your knees pulled right up to your chest, to the point where you couldn't move, and then you would be tethered by another rope going to the bank, the people who were throwing you in, and then they'd throw you in, and they would measure how far you sank. Now, there are cases of people did drown. People had heart attacks and being thrown into cold water, things like that. Accidents happened. But generally speaking, the vast majority of people would sink down below 12 foot. And as soon as you hit the 12 foot mark, as marked on the rope, you'd be pulled out to huge joy and jubilation. You'd passed the trial by ordeal. You had been protected by God himself. He had judged you innocent. A couple of things happened from that. One, your own faith in God is enhanced. You realise, I've been protected by God. I'm one of the good guys. The people around you, your community, know that you have been protected and touched by the hand of God. Otherwise, you'd have been found not guilty. You'd have been found guilty. So your esteem within society goes up a little bit. The faith of the people in your community is enhanced as well, because they have seen the hand of God at work. And it does the church good as well, because all of a sudden they've got a congregation who is even more intently religious and full of faith and God-fearing than they were before. So it does the church absolutely no harm whatsoever to use their knowledge to make sure that people pass the trial by ordeal. It ensures their continued existence. Right, so now, but then there's other tests as well. Can they fudge the results of the other ones? Like, for instance, trial by hot water, in which you would be brought to, or you would be acquired to attend the place of trial, usually a church or a chapel. And as you arrive, and along with all the other people in your community who are going to come and witness the trial by ordeal, first thing you see when approaching the main entrance to the church or the chapel is a brazier with a kettle on the boil, literally boiling water. And everybody can see this boiling water bubbling in this cauldron or kettle outside on this brazier of hot coals, merrily bubbling away, so everybody knows that water is boiling. And then you go into the church and praise and all that sort of stuff. Now, one of the first things you're required to do is to cleanse your hands. Part of the ritual is cleansing, ritual cleansing, because you cannot be judged properly if you have the stain of, if you've got the stain and the dirt and the grime of earth on you, because you're being judged by God, who can't be coming into contact with anything as mundane as it. So as soon as you start washing your hands, that's when they bring the kettle into the church, and they put it on a table or on the floor or whatever, and then you start washing your hands. Give it a good wash. You don't forget you're a medieval peasant probably. You just come from the fields and you wash your hands so they're absolutely spotless. You have to, it's part of the ritual. And then you walk over to the kettle. They drop the stone in, and on the given signal you reach in and you grab the stone, you bring it out. You bring, and it's painful. It's excruciating. However, did it really do any damage? For instance, I've actually spilled boiling water on my hand, fresh out of the kettle, and it's been, but it hasn't really done any damage because it was in and out. The water had also had time to cool down. Boiling water cools down surprisingly quickly once it's taken off the boil. I mean, how many of you got into the bath that's too hot and actually stood in the bath while the water cools down well enough for you to sit in it, but in the meantime your feet are going red raw, but there's no damage done, but you can feel that heat. So I think it's a similar situation there. They timed it perfectly so that when you plunge your hand into that kettle of boiling water that everybody had just seen on the boil outside, it's cooled down enough that you'll feel the heat and your arm will go red raw and you grasp the stone. Everybody's seen the ordeal. But now comes the trial, because the trial isn't just the grabbing of the stone. It also includes healing. Now bear in mind your arm is now red raw. But if you're lucky, they've timed it right so there's no blistering. If there's blistering, you're in trouble, because that's going to take longer than 3 days to heal, because that's how long you've got to heal. Now the 3 days given for healing is based on the Holy Trinity, God the Father and the Holy Ghost. Or God the Father and the Holy Spirit, depending on what denomination you are. So you've got 3 days to heal up. So you don't want any blisters to have formed. If there's no blisters, your hand is going to be good as gold, right as rain, back to normal within 3 days. At which point you are judged to have passed your trial by ordeal. And again, your faith is enhanced, your community's faith is enhanced, and the church's position within the community is enhanced. everybody's happy. The status quo has been maintained because you've been touched by the hand of God. He has protected and proved your innocence. Now we come to the trial by hot iron. Now this one's a little bit like trickier. Now the trial by hot iron was reserved really for more serious crimes. Trial by hot water was for fairly minor crimes, or for women. Trial by cold water was for heretical crimes or crimes against the church, such as violence towards a clergyman or stealing from the church, things like that. So they were, but trial by hot iron was reserved for crimes or accusations of crimes that if you went for a trial by your peers, could actually end in a death sentence. So it's serious stuff, even though you could be sentenced to death for all sorts of fairly trivial things. It's a serious occasion. So it's the trial itself is a lot more serious. And basically, as in the trial by hot water, everybody turns up at the church or the chapel to witness the trial by ordeal. And the first thing they see outside the door is a brazier of red hot coals and an iron bar in the brazier heating up. And they see it being pulled out and put back in, tested. The accused goes into the church, and the first thing he does is he washes his hands. While this is going on, the clergyman in charge of the iron bar brings the iron bar out of the brazier and walks over to a piece of meat, or probably a piece of leather, and tests the bar against the leather. Now it's hot enough at this stage where the leather will singe and the smell will be horrible, and there'll be smoke and all sorts coming off it, while the accused person who's undergoing the trial is washing their hands. Now they're washing their hands in cold water for a kick-off, and they're making a damn good job of it, and they don't stop until the clergyman says, right, you're clean enough. Now that might take a minute or so. Now, unknown to the people taking part in the trial or witnessing the trial, iron cools down really quickly. Now the clergymen know this. For instance, iron heated up to about 800 degrees, which is getting towards red hot, will actually cool down to about 350, 400 degrees in about 20 seconds. In about 30 seconds, it's down to 250 degrees. It's still hot enough that when you grasp it, it's going to be painful and it's going to blister your hand. But you've had 30 seconds at least of washing your hands, if not longer. So they bring the iron bar in and they present it to you. And then you grasp it and you've got to walk 5 paces, which is usually the length of the aisle of the church. Now you cannot drop that bar, so you're gripping it quite tightly. And this is where something comes in that Andrew Sock mentioned, which when I've looked into I thought, he's got a point. There's a thing called the Leyden effect, and that states that when two surfaces are brought together, if there is a liquid on one of the surfaces and the temperature differential is high enough, that liquid will be instantly turned into gas or steam, and that steam will form a barrier between one surface and the other. Now you're grasping that bar tightly, and it's hot enough possibly to instigate a Leyden effect within your hand. So you're getting some protection from the steam. Don't forget the steam's going to burn as well, but you're not getting the full force of the iron bar. You carry it your 5 paces and you drop it. Your hand is a mess. There's massive blisters forming all over. Everywhere you've touched that bar, you've got blisters forming on your fingers. Alexa, stop. Blisters forming on on your thumb, everywhere. So your hand's a mess. So you've just undergone the ordeal. Everybody's seen you do it. They're now hoping that you're going to pass the trial, and you've got 3 weeks in which for your hand to heal. Now that seems a little bit, because everybody has seen the bar tip come out of the brazier. They've seen it applied to a piece of leather which is charred and twisted and burnt. They've seen you grasp it. They've seen you carry it 5 meters, and they've seen the state of your hand with the blisters and everything. But you've got 3 weeks, and the damage is nowhere near as bad as it may at first seem. It's entirely superficial. Now if you take care of it, and people knew how to take care of burns and blisters with ointments and unguents and things like that, you take careful care of it. Yeah? As long as you've taken care of it, within 3 weeks, generally speaking, that hand is going to have all but healed, if not completely healed. And that signifies that you have passed the trial by ordeal. Again, the 3 weeks is based on the Trinity, God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, because it's all part of a religious thing. And at the end of the 3 weeks, your hand is as good as new almost, if not better. Well, it won't be better, but you know what I mean. Something's happened. God has touched you and he's protected you, and he has declared you innocent of the crimes you're accused of. So again, your reputation is enhanced, your faith is enhanced, your community's faith is enhanced, and the church has come off in a slightly better position. Now, why is this important? Well, for one thing, if the church allows people to fail the trial by ordeal on too many occasions, there's bound to be an occasion when somebody accused of a crime is known to be innocent. Maybe because people within the community know who actually committed the crime, but they can't say anything, because if they do, because you have already been accused and you're about to undergo trial by ordeal, if they say something and you fail, but they've already identified the person who actually did it, they could be charged with bearing false witness. So people could actually get in trouble for pointing out. So rather than risk getting into trouble, even though they know you're innocent, it's better just to let the situation lie, because God will find a way of punishing the guilty. All they're interested in is protecting the innocent. And that's all the church is interested in, is making sure that the innocent are protected. So they use their wiles and their ways and their twists and their turns. Now don't forget, this is a time when the church was quite happy to take money in return for ensuring somebody's position in heaven. Even though really, but the fact that you gave money to the church, as far as the church was concerned and everybody else, it ensured because you were devoting your life and your wealth to God, and that's all that mattered. Anyway, there we go. I hope you found that interesting. Like I said, I find that it's fascinating, the fact that these things might have happened, and it makes sense to me as well, because after all, if you have too many people, I mean, just to make a point, I mean, it's a bit hard to get figures, but it's estimated that between the 9th century and the 16th century, there was approximately 500 people burned for heresy and for witchcraft. 80% of the people who underwent trial by ordeal or trial by cold water were heretics and witches. But there was only well, that's just the ones who were found guilty. There was only, they reckon, about 500 people burnt at the stake over 500 years. That's less than one person a year over 500 years. Now, if people were constantly failing, and yet there's records of some weeks 30 or 40 trials by ordeal being conducted in some areas, because it tended to be seasonal as to when they did it, and yet people weren't being found guilty. And I think it's because it wasn't in the church's interest to find everybody guilty. I mean, if something happened and you failed the test, well then, so be it. You've been found guilty. God had seen fit that you should be punished for your crime, even though you still protest your innocence. Nobody believes you, because it's such a rare occurrence for you to fail a trial by ordeal as an innocent person. They just accept it. Anyway, like I said, there's no direct evidence, but there's lots of anecdotal and lots of inference. Like, I love the phrase, reading between the lines of history, for this to have been a thing. Anyway, hope you found it interesting, or as interesting as I did. Sorry it's late being posted, but stay safe, keep slinging the sticks, and we'll talk again soon. Cheers, guys.